Is Ukraine more NATO than NATO? Yesterday, President Biden made it pretty clear that the USA still does not want Ukraine to be in NATO. This frustrates people like Russian dissident Gary Kasparov, the great chess master, who says Ukraine is the only European nation that fights for the very purpose for which NATO was built. On the other hand, with some good news, supplies from the USA and now this new permission to use some of these American weapons seems to be making a big difference in Kharkiv region. Now that the Ukrainians can hit Russian targets on Russian soil, Kharkiv city is safer and quieter after a month of terribly intense attacks. We also discussed today why stories of good and evil matter to Ukrainians. Sometimes it confuses people in the West. Why do you talk about fairy tales in a time of war while Ukrainians have their reasons? Reasons that were echoed in some of the last words of the famed Ukrainian female medic, Cheka. We talk about all that today in this My Daily broadcast on Chicago's WGN Radio with host Bob Sirott. Please like and follow or subscribe to make sure you don't miss our daily 10-minute reports, plus additional content like our unique videos made by great Ukrainian artists to tell the story of the war and what's happening in this struggle between good and evil.
Little Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. And Joe, we heard a lot about your story yesterday, emails and texts like this one from a listener. Bob, Joseph's story about the female medic who ended up sacrificing her life for the future Ukrainian generations made me think of our greatest generation in World War II. This is now Ukraine's greatest generation, and I pray that her loss is not in vain. Hopefully history will hold these heroes in the positive light they deserve. It is going to be known as the greatest generation, perhaps. What do you think, Joe?
Indeed, Bob. Hello from LVIV. And you think about not just Ukrainians, but also so many foreigners from all over the world who've come here to help in different capacities. Many of them have given their lives as well. And Cheka, she, as a Ukrainian woman, she was free. She could go live in Portugal on the beach, free to go anywhere she wants, would be welcomed anywhere. And she chose to use her skills and her drive and her talents to serve the wounded. And she knew. I mean, it was really so difficult and dangerous the past few months in Kharkiv region. She even was sharing videos with friends saying, hey, in case I die, please do these things for me. And one of the things she said, she wanted people to gather and to sing some of the most ancient Ukrainian songs in her honor if she was killed while she was tending to wounded soldiers. And indeed, that's what people did a few days ago. Tens of thousands of people, or maybe about almost 10,000 people. It's hard to have big gatherings, but you can't stop Ukrainians when they want to commemorate someone's funeral. And they gathered in the main square of the Maidan of Kyiv, where that protest and revolution was in 2014. They gathered in the square and they knelt and they sang these ancient songs that she had requested. And she knew what she was facing. And this is you have so many stories of bravery and courage, and it's what inspires people, especially. It's what is it now? Day 831 of the full-scale Russian invasion. And, it's people's whole future, are taken away. And the people, a few days ago over the weekend, I was recalling with friends, people used to say, oh, I want to, people would say, I want to drive to Vienna for the weekend or go, see family or friends in the UK or, all these things are stopped and prevented. And so, but amid that difficult news, and even right now as we talk, I have reports that there are missiles. The missiles have been heading to Kharkiv city, but it's important to note that those attacks that we've discussed on Kharkiv have been greatly reduced. I mean, for about a month and a half, every night, actually multiple times a day, Kharkiv was getting pounded, and it's less intense. It's certainly less intense, and there have been no major Russian advances on the ground in Kharkiv region since May 20th. So everyone was focused. This is kind of what happens. Everyone focuses on the very dramatic moves of Russia to enter Ukrainian territory and, just how vulnerable Kharkiv was. That focus helped put pressure, I think, on people in Washington to say, OK, it's time to let Ukraine hit Russians on Russian soil. But now, when there's an absence of, daily horrible news, sometimes that gets missed. But I think we are seeing the effects of these American weapons And the main one that Ukrainians are allowed to use is called HIMARS. And so there's a saying people have started to say here. HIMARS means high mobility artillery rocket system developed in the USA. But the saying here is now HIMARS by orcs, like goodbye HIMARS, goodbye orcs. Orcs being the terms that Ukrainians use for the Russians from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And I think sometimes Americans criticize too. They say, well, why do you talk about this? Why do Ukrainians talk about this war, like it's some kind of fairy tale? Why do you call the Russians orcs? But if you look at the positive side, if you look at like Cheka the medic, in all of our great stories, they're stories of heroism. And in fact, some of the last words Cheka the medic that she shared with the world online, she said, storytelling is important. It prepares you, especially when you're a child, to that when evil comes, that you have to stand for the good. How important it is to have these ancient stories, and so that is a big part of the Ukrainian psyche, and you see that playing out here. Meanwhile, I think there is certainly increased momentum for Ukraine to get more permission to hit back at the Russians. And reporters asked a prominent German parliamentarian, Marie Agnes Strack-Zimmermann. She is head of the Defense Committee of the German Parliament. And reporters said to her, what will happen if a Western jet hits a Russian warplane? And this is the question comes from this sort of sense of fear. Is Russia going to go nuclear? And the answer of the head of Germany's Parliamentary Defense Committee was this: well, Russia will have one plane less. And so I think, with some of this rhetoric, we're starting to see a little bit less fear from the West and more confidence as Ukrainians show what they can do with these tools.
I read where Russia's military still holds about a 10-to-1 advantage in available artillery. That's true still, isn't it?
Yeah, it's both with artillery. It's with sheer number of soldiers. When it comes to numbers, they still have huge advantage. But when it comes to technology, whether it's Ukrainian drones, Russians have also been refining their drone technology, but Ukrainians, it's a constant process of adapting. But then, especially with American ingenuity, those HIMARS, and then also the ATACMS, which Ukrainians are still not allowed to use to hit on Russian soil, they're incredibly precise and incredibly powerful, and that's why we're seeing this reduction in attacks upon Kharkiv. So Ukrainians need, better quality, better technology, because when it comes to numbers, they can never hope to compete against that. And, this is yesterday, President Biden said that Ukraine doesn't really need to be in NATO in order for there to be peace and victory. That comment has upset a lot of people because there's people here and a lot of, pro-Ukraine supporters around the world say Ukraine is actually doing what NATO was designed to do, to protect a free Europe from Russian authoritarianism. And as I mentioned yesterday, that Gary Kasparov, who's one of the few Russian dissidents, the chess grandmaster, he said Ukraine is the only European nation that is actually fighting for the very purpose for which NATO was built. It's a whole raison d'etre of NATO, and yet Washington still won't even. They say, no, Ukraine doesn't even need it, even though Ukraine is doing this work. And so this is still a question. It's like whenever Ukraine has great momentum, wouldn't that be the time to really say, hey, we're bringing you into NATO? And instead, it feels like a step back for many people.
Interesting. Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. Keep the faith, Joe. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що сказав?
Well, which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Єбать.